Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I want to this evening go through a passage from Gutta Nikaya that's quite rich. Where does it start? Yes, this is from the Book of Tens, and it's the Buddha giving one of those progressive lists, how one thing leads to another. And it's sort of working in reverse order, beginning with the first statement is, Bhikkhus, if these three things were not found in the world, the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, would not arise in the world, and the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by him would not shine in the world. What three? Birth, old age, and death. If these three things were not found in the world, the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one would not arise in the world, and the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by him would not shine in the world. But because these three things are found in the world, the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one arises in the world, and the Dhamma and discipline proclaimed by him shines in the world. So this is the starting point. And this birth, old age, and death, this triad defines what in Zen tradition they call the great matter, and in the West it's called the existential dilemma. It's the inescapable reality of existence, that we are caught between birth and death, and aging in the middle, that we're moving from birth through aging to death, and that's the universal fate of all sentient beings. This is dukkha, or samsara, in its most primal form. This is the dilemma of human beings and of all beings. And it's a significant statement that he says the Buddha would not arise in the world if these things didn't exist. If they didn't exist, there wouldn't be any need for a Buddha. There wouldn't be any motivation for the Buddha. What we get from the story of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, is that this was his quest from the beginning. He was determined to escape from birth, old age, and death. There's most humans, most individuals, I think, choose to avert their eyes from this dilemma, not look at it, not think about it. The Bodhisattva faced it fearlessly head on. Well, this is the nature of all beings. There's the story of him leaving the home life. When he went for a chariot ride with his charioteer, Channa, they encountered the four divine messengers, the Devadutta, a sick man, an old man, a dead man, and then the Samana, the wanderer. And each time the Bodhisattva was overcome with emotion and had to go back to the palace. And had this very strong confrontation with those realities, and rather than dismiss them from his mind or seek an escape, in a diversion in sensuality, which was certainly available to him, he tackled the problem head on. How can beings escape from this? So it goes on. Without abandoning these three things, one is incapable of abandoning birth, old age, and death. What three? Lust, hatred, and delusion. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning birth, old age, and death. So this takes it to another very primal level of life, of mental activity, is the three root defilements. Lopa, dosa, moha. Here translated as lust, hatred, and delusion. These are the root of all, and this is that they're called in Pali mula, the roots. There's the root of all suffering, of all becoming, of all defilement. They all trace back to these three, and they're present in all unenlightened beings to more or less degree. And all the other various defilements spring from these three. These three are the root. There's a whole chapter in the Visuddhimagga about analyzing personality types according to these three roots. Like whichever root is dominant in a person, they're either a lust or greed type, or an anger type, or a deluded type. And there's sub-variations on these, but this is the primary division of beings. And it's interesting corollary to that. Part of that is that when they start to develop spiritually, they develop differently. The greed type or the lust type develops through the faith faculty, and they tend to, this love of beautiful things tends to turn into devotional practice, love of beautiful shrines and chanting and paying homage to the Buddha, and they develop strongly through the faith faculty. The anger type develops through the intellect. So hatred or anger turns into a impatience with ignorance. So they're attracted to, like, the Abhidhamma, or contemplating dependent origination, and developing vipassana. And the anger or ill will is channeled and refined into that way. And then the delusion type, interestingly, develops through psychic powers. They tend to more easily develop psychic powers, and I think it's because they have, to begin with, they have a weak grasp on what's real and what's not. And when things start to arise, like the sense that you feel like you have a premonition, or you think you're reading somebody's mind, you hear a thought, the more rational type person wouldn't nourish that seed. They would tend to write it off as their imagination and forget about it. And so they never nourish that seed. But the deluded type can't tell the difference between reality or imagination, or did I dream it, or was it real? And they allow those seeds to flourish. But these are the three roots that, if they're not abandoned, they're not overcome, they, as this text says, there's no possibility of overcoming birth, old age, and death. These are the three roots that keep us ultimately bound to samsaric becoming. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning lust, hatred, and delusion. What three? Personal existence view, doubt, and wrong grasp of behavior and observances. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning lust, hatred, and delusion. So one cannot release lust, hatred, and delusion without abandoning these three things, which are the three fetters, the three first fetters, the three lowest fetters, the fetters that are overcome by stream entry. Sakaya Ditti, which Bhikkhu Bodhi here, he translates it as personal existence view. It's more often translated as personality view. Doubt and Silabhata Paramasa, which is usually translated rite and ritual clinging. And here he's translated it as wrong grasp of behavior and observances, which is actually a better, more literal translation. These are the three fetters that are broken by the stream winner, and what they have in common is they all have to do with the view, with ditthi, with samaditthi. The destruction of these three fetters is right view. When the sense of personality view is the cognition of a self, a sense, a sense on the level of ditthi, a view of a self. Doubt is uncertainty about the Dhamma. And rite and ritual clinging is a superstitious approach to practice and to the Dhamma. So they all have to do with view or understanding. And until those are broken, there's no possibility of an end being made of lust, hatred, and delusion. So the implication of that passage is that a stream entry is required for beginning to make an end of lust, hatred, and delusion. Now, it's not the end. Stream entry is not the end of lust, hatred, and delusion, but it's the beginning. It's of the end of their total tyranny over the mind, because there is a realization of the unconditioned. Then there can be no more doubt. And having glimpsed the unconditioned, it throws the conditioned into a new perspective and understanding, and there can be no more adhesion to the self-view, and there can be no more superstitious approach. So how does one get to that point? How does one break those fetters and open the Dhamma eye? In the next paragraph, and this is in the book of 10, so there's 10 of these steps altogether. The next one is, without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning personal existence view, doubt, and wrong grasp of behavior and observances. What three? Careless attention, following a wrong path, and mental sluggishness. Without abandoning these three things, one is incapable of abandoning personal existence view, doubt, and wrong grasp, behavior, and observance. So careless attention, following a wrong path, and mental sluggishness. Careless attention is ayoniso manasikara. There is a pair of opposites, is often mentioned as yoniso and ayoniso manasikara, which is skillful and unskillful attention. Is when we take anything into our consciousness, any object, through our eyes, ears, nose, body, or mind, we pay attention to it. We can either pay attention to it skillfully, seeing it in light of Dhamma, seeing it as impermanent, unsubstantial, and so forth, or we can regard it with the defilements of greed, desire, or ill will, anger, loathing. This is unwise attention, ayoniso manasikara, and it's marked by focusing on certain signs and particulars. This is a phrase from the Visuddhimagga. And this applies to, for example, sensual lust, because when one sees a person and is desired, that person is their body is desired in terms of sensual desire, the mind is focusing on certain signs and particulars of the shape and the color and so on. You're not focusing on snot and guts and pus, so it's a selective viewing. And it's the same with negative. When we see something we see as ugly or undesirable, we focus on those aspects. Whereas wise attention, one sees things just as dhammas, as phenomena, sees them as marked by the characteristics. They're impermanent, they're imperfect, and they're ultimately void. So this is wise and unwise attention. Following a wrong path is if the following of a path, padipada, is like is what the word they use for practice. There's a book of Ajahn Mahabuddha's Padipada. It's the book of his describing his path of practice. And any kind of course we follow in life is in a sense a path of practice, and it's either a right one leading to liberation and freedom and of the mind and away from the defilements, or it's a wrong path that leads us into more confusion, delusion, lust, and anger. And this wrong paths could be of a strictly worldly kind, like following a path of just trying to make as much money as possible. This is then the path leading towards greed and acquisitiveness. Or it can be spiritual beliefs and practices that lead to greater delusion, a greater re-emphasis of the self-view, that emphasize that reinforce the self-view. So there's all kinds of wrong paths. And mental sluggishness. That's pretty self-explanatory. Just the mind dull, doesn't make an effort, just lazy, sunken sloth and torpor, inert. The Buddha said that the goal is only attained by the energetic, it's not attained by the idle. So being mentally sluggish is similar to being physically sluggish. If you're physically sluggish, you don't want to get up, you don't want to do anything, but mentally sluggish, you don't want to activate or apply the mind. I would say in terms of Dhamma factors, it would be a weakness of Vitakka Vichara, a weakness of applied and sustained mind, the lack of those two jhana factors. So then how does one get rid of these things? Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning careless attention, following of a wrong path, and mental sluggishness. What three? Muddle-mindedness, lack of clear comprehension, and mental distraction. Without abandoning these three things, one is incapable of abandoning careless attention, following of a wrong path, and mental sluggishness. Now, muddle-mindedness is kind of confused mind that's unable to focus, and it's constantly losing the thread. And you can see that, we all have bouts of muddle-mindedness, but you can see this in some individuals, that they're unable to focus or comprehend anything because their mind wanders off in the middle. I recall one individual that shall remain nameless, but he was here for a while, years and years ago, and he was a very sweet fellow, easy to get along with, but he was definitely muddle-minded. And you tried to explain something to him, and you would think he's listening, he's nodding his head and going, uh-huh. But his mind was a million miles away, and he would totally forget what you'd said and not understand, not grasp, take in a word of it. So I kind of worked with him, and what I came up with was a very useful exercise, which I think we could all apply from time to time if you find yourself falling into muddle-mindedness, is to try and determine at what point the mind went astray. So you'll be trying to listen to something or read something, and you lose it and your mind is off thinking about something else. Well, as soon as you're aware of that, try and catch it and trace it back. And try and, okay, I'm thinking about this, that was because of this, and try and trace it back to the point where the mind left the track. There's a retroactive examination of your thoughts. That can be very illuminating, because there's always some trigger that pulls the mind off. Sometimes it's a connection made that a mental connection that that reminds me of this and that, and you go wander off into another byway and you lost your main focus. Or it might be an external stimulus. And this happens very often in meditation. If you find yourself wandering off in thought and imagination, you've lost the thread. If you trace it back, it's very often an external stimulus, a sound or a smell or a sensation in the body that began, which wasn't clearly noticed at the moment. And there was some reaction to it, and then a connection, and then the mind goes off playing merry games. And this is muddle-mindedness. Lack of clear comprehension. Clear comprehension is sampojanya, and it's often paired with sati. You'll see the phrase mindfulness and clear comprehension. Generally, when it's paired like that, sati is taken to mean the more momentary, precise mindfulness, and sampojanya is a clear comprehension, is a broader awareness. There's a story that from Ajahn that he used to illustrate the difference. He said that one time when he was not very senior, there was another monk came to visit who was senior to him. So they sat him at the front of the line, and everybody was very impressed by him because he wore his robes very neatly, and he was very precise in his motions, very restrained. And they thought, this is a very good monk, very high degree of mindfulness. And then they went out on alms round. He walked in front, being the senior one, he walked in front of Ajahn, and he was impeccable in his bearing, and every step was taken with perfect mindfulness. But then they come to a corner in the village, and instead of taking the corner, he continued with impeccable decorum to go straight forward and underneath a building into a big pile of dung, buffalo dung. So this is, lack of clear comprehension, which is taking in purpose, meaning, suitability. There's different kinds of clear comprehension, but it's generally, being able to put things into context. So it's a broader focus than a narrow single moment, one Dhamma at a time. It's seeing the full picture. And the last is mental distraction. It's the mind that is easily swayed from its purpose, getting distracted easily. The mind can wander off. And this is something that's obviously a difficulty or a hindrance in meditation. And particularly if we're developing samatha, we're trying to fill the mind with a single object and develop stability of mind, then getting distracted by sense impressions or by thoughts is obviously a hindrance. And the skill that requires is to develop the skill of non-attention, to be able to ignore that which is pulling you away. You're able to stay present with not go, oh, what's that? That's interesting. I'll follow that for a while. Being able to restrain that impulse. There's a a thing that a little technique that meditation teachers know of to use is if you've got a group of people meditating and there's a sudden noise, like there's a car, backfiring, or there's an animal screeching or something, then to pay attention to people and see, those individuals that react and have a startled reaction, they're not doing very well. They're not very deep in the meditation because they're distracted. They're pulled out of their practice by an external stimulus. But the ones who just remain unmoved by it, they're deep in their practice. It's an extreme example of that I heard a story about this Tibetan Rinpoche, Sonam Rinpoche, that very impressive man. I met him, and at one point he was one of the subjects that they were doing at the university in Madison, Wisconsin. They were doing these brain scan studies of meditators. And so they had people hooked up with, whatever it is, they see the brain waves, and while they were in meditation. And they did some individuals, just kind of random students as controls, and then experienced meditators. And they tried to get these Tibetan masters and Zen masters and so on, whoever they could find. And Sonam Rinpoche volunteered to participate. And one of the things that they would do is when people were meditating, they would ring a bell in the room. And the control subjects would always be a big jump in their brain pattern. And the good meditators, there might be a little blip. Sonam Rinpoche's was flat. And they'd never seen that before, no reaction whatsoever. So they thought, well, maybe he's hard of hearing. So they give him a test, of hearing test, and he was fine hearing. So they did the test again, and they used a louder noise and a louder noise. In the end, they fired a starter pistol in the room. And there's still no reaction. But then when he came out of meditation, they asked him, how was that session for you? He said, it's very good, but can you tell me what was going on with this gunshot that went off? Is there any trouble? So he had been aware of it, but absolutely no reaction. He didn't allow his mind to be drawn into it. The next step, without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning muddle-mindedness, lack of clear comprehension, and mental distraction. What three? Lack of desire to see the noble ones, lack of desire to hear the noble Dhamma, and a mind bent on criticism. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning muddle-mindedness, lack of clear comprehension, and mental distraction. So the lack of desire to see the noble ones being the ones who have attained to the path and fruit, and lack of desire to hear the Dhamma. So one doesn't take any interest in the teachings. No, it doesn't want to see or hear teachers, and doesn't want to hear the Dhamma. And a mind bent on criticism. I think we all know this kind of a mindset of people that are very cynical and skeptical and always pick holes in everything. That they're incapable of hearing anything honestly, hearing any kind of teaching without being intensely critical. It's important to have, to have a sense of balance, because you also don't want to be credulous, gullible type that just believes any nonsense you hear. But the other extreme is this, the mind bent on criticism. This is related to the balance between the faculties of faith and the faculty of discriminating wisdom, which is very important balance. And it's said that one who has lots of faith but no discriminating wisdom is just superstitious, gullible. They're sort of the kind of the first thing they hear, or the last person they spoke to, that they believe that, and that's wonderful, without any discernment. And the person who has discriminating wisdom without any faith falls prey to cunning, which is said to be like a disease caused by medicine, very hard to cure. Well, so one has to have an open, faithful approach, but also guided by wisdom and discernment. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning lack of desire to see the noble ones, lack of desire to hear the Dhamma, and a mind bent on criticism. What three? Restlessness, non-restraint, and immorality. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning lack of desire to see the noble ones, lack of desire to hear the noble Dhamma, and a mind bent on criticism. Well, lack of restraint, immorality, and restlessness. If a person is in their behavior and their lifestyle, if they're immoral and have no restraint, they're adverse to hearing the Dhamma or consulting the noble ones, because it brings criticism on their, they feel shame, right? It's not something they want to hear. That they're content to continue on their heedless path. Right? And the restlessness makes it very difficult to hear the Dhamma or to follow the Dhamma. One is averse to being quiet, sitting still, developing that inner peace and stillness. If one is seeking excitement and thrills and adventure, then kind of the Theravada Buddhist path doesn't seem very appealing. Yeah, it's not full of flash and special effects. And if one is immoral, then doesn't keep the precepts, has no intention of keeping the precepts, then the Dhamma seems to be unpleasant and restrictive and oppressive to their mind, so that they're not going to seek it out. If they encounter it by chance, they're not going to take any interest in it. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning restlessness, non-restraint, and immorality. What three? Lack of faith, uncharitableness, and laziness. So this is the root of immorality and heedlessness and restlessness, is lack of faith, uncharitableness, and laziness. So lack of faith, lack of saddha, confidence. One has no confidence in the possibility of liberation, then one's obviously not going to pursue anything leading that way. Uncharitableness is the meanness of spirit, is a non-giving, is stinginess. The defilement of stinginess is a particular type of avarice, a particular subset of greed, is castigated often particularly in the Jataka stories and the Dhammapada stories. Example is always given as one of the worst types of person is the stingy miser. He's so stingy he doesn't even enjoy his own wealth. He lives like a pauper, just hoarding his wealth, and certainly never gives anything to anybody else. There's a number of stories about this type of person, and then often the gods intervene to shake him up and make him see that his way is wrong. But this is like the uncharitableness that this obviously reinforces the sense of self. And there's a fortified little self, and this is mine, and I'm not going to share. And the emphasis in the stories is that such a person is profoundly unhappy even in this life. They can't enjoy anything because they're always afraid of someone's going to take it from them. There's one of these stories, this miser who's developed a strong desire for a bowl of milk porridge, and he was had storerooms full of gold. It's not like no problem he could have milk porridge here, but he was so afraid someone might try and get some from him that he went off into the woods and hid in a grove to eat his bowl of milk porridge, so that no one would smell it and come and bother him for something. First, the gods came and played a number of tricks on him, and there's several of the gods, Saka and Matali and somebody else, I forget, Vasakama, they came in the form of Brahmins and begged them for some milk rice. So he gave them small portions each, and then Matali, when the guy wasn't looking, turned himself into a dog and peed in the guy's bowl. As a whole bunch of other stuff happened, but this is the type of they become figures of fun, these stingy misers in these stories. And laziness, which is a little different than just plain sloth and torpor. Laziness is sort of deliberate. It's like not deliberately not making the effort, sort of enjoying and relishing your sloth and torpor. So lack of faith, uncharitableness, and laziness. Without having abandoned these three things, one is incapable of abandoning lack of faith, uncharitableness, and laziness. What three? Disrespect, being difficult to correct, and bad friendship. So now we're getting to aspects of practical daily life practice. And these are things that apply very much to the monastic life, but they could also, by extension, apply to most human relations. But I think these terms, particularly the first two, disrespect and being difficult to correct, they very resonant with passages in the Vinaya texts. Respect is very much emphasized in monastic practice, that we respect our elders and seniors in the holy life, and to show disrespect to a senior monk, really in Thai culture, that's considered very, very onerous thing to do, very shocking behavior. But we should have respect, for everybody. Respect everybody's place and their situation and their difficulties, and respect is very important. If you have disrespect, then this leads to quarreling and immorality and disharmonious relations. Being difficult to correct. It's one of the virtues that's spoken of in the Vinaya text as being easy to admonish. And there's skill around being able to give an admonishment properly. But to be able to take an admonishment, not feel slighted or insulted or upset, but to take this as a teaching, this is something I can correct. I thank you for pointing that out. There's a story of Sariputta going out on alms round, and as a junior novice pointed out to him, "Sir, your robe is not correctly rolled all the way around. It's uneven." And Sariputta thanked the novice and fixed his robe. And some of the other monks thought that this novice was being cheeky and disrespectful, and Sariputta said, no, he was pointing out, he was admonishing me. This is I'm quite glad that he pointed out my error. And being difficult to correct is considered a very problematic. And there's actually a mention in the text of something called the Brahmadanda, which is the divine penalty or the supreme penalty. Is if a monk is so recalcitrant, and then it can be ordered that no one admonish him. And this is like the supreme punishment, to withhold admonishment. Just let him do whatever he wants, don't say nothing to him. You know? And that was considered to be the most onerous thing that you could do. This was done to the Buddha's charioteer Channa for a while, because after he was ordained, he became kind of puffed up with pride that, oh, I knew the Buddha way back when. I used to be a charioteer. And he was kind of lording it over the other monks. And so the Buddha ordered the Brahmadanda applied to him. And bad friendship. This is something the Buddha spoke about often, and it comes up in a lot of the lists of how to develop mental faculties, like different ways of developing, say, the 7 enlightenment factors. At the end of each one, like to develop samadhi, associate with people who are good in samadhi, avoid people who are poor in samadhi. You know, to develop energy, associate with people who are energetic, avoid people who are not energetic. And in a more general sense, the Kalyana Mitta, the good friend, is very important. And there's the famous passage where Ananda says, I think that Kalyana Mitta is half of the holy life, and the Buddha says, say not so, it is the whole of the holy life. And bad friends are associates that will bring you down and encourage you in defilement. So we're getting near the end of this list. One who is morally, without having abandoned these 3 things, one is incapable of abandoning disrespect, being difficult to correct, and bad friendship. What 3? Moral shamelessness, moral recklessness, and heedlessness. Without having abandoned these 3 things, one is incapable of abandoning disrespect, being difficult to correct, and bad friendship. So moral recklessness, shamelessness, and heedlessness. This is the lack of hiri and ottappa. These are the 2 qualities that are called the guardians of the world. And they're difficult to translate exactly. And I think he's done a pretty good job here. This is moral shamelessness, moral recklessness. The older translation, the one that's kind of standard, is what is it? Moral or shame and dread. Sometimes moral shame and dread, which sounds kind of off-putting. Like this is supposed to be positive qualities that you want, and I think the qualities really they're like a moral sense, a sense of conscience, and one looks outward and one looks inward. The first one, hiri, is, you could say, a self-respect. You know, you don't do something heedless. This is the sense of shame. You would feel ashamed to do this because you have more respect for yourself. You value your own sila, your own morality. So this restrains you from doing evil things. And ottappa is is translated as dread, or he translates it as moral heedfulness, is having a sense of consequence. Understanding this is bad karma, this will lead to bad results, and then not doing it for that reason. And these two things are called the guardians of the world, because when they're present, people behave morally and wisely, and if they're not present, then people behave like wild animals, and it is very damaging. And heedlessness, apamada, heedlessness, not paying attention, being morally or ethically reckless, just heedless, irregardless of consequences, just run ahead and do anything. That as soon as the mind moves, like giving in to impulses. So that's the end of this list, and then he goes, the Buddha, in the rest of the sutta, he goes, I won't go through the whole thing, because what he does is then goes through this list in the forward direction. So he says, having abandoned these three factors, then one can abandon these three factors, and so on, all the way up to back to the factors of stream entry, and then overcoming, which leads to the overcoming of birth, old age, and death. So this is a method of teaching that we find many places in the suttas, is these kind of progressive lists of one thing leading to another, and there's many different kind of variations on that. This is particular one is kind of unique. I don't think I've seen that particular progression detail like that anywhere else. Many of the factors are mentioned elsewhere, but to put them in that particular order and sequence, it's a very very rich field for contemplation. Okay, so I think that's sufficient.
Dhamayam Dhamakataya Sadhukaram Tadamase